This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. It's episode 460 of the Craft Beer and Brewing podcast. I'm Jamie Bogner. And I mean, if I'm being honest, I picked up a nasty cold from the kids last weekend, and I am making it through here with some Advil for the fever and some hot tea to try to keep my vocal cords working as best they can. I mean, I'm sure you can hear it. But as that old saying goes, the show must go on. So for this week's podcast episode, I have an excerpt from the 3-day deep dive series of webinars we held last week. I managed to make it through those before getting sick, thankfully. If you missed it, here's the deal. We've always taken a platform-agnostic approach to media. We strive to bring you inspiration, education, and perspectives through whatever media you prefer. That means print magazines, web stories, email newsletters, video classes, audio-only podcasts, live consumer and B2B events, and interactive video webinars that we have dubbed deep dives. Last week, we premiered the first of our, let's call them imperial, or maybe we should say triple dry hopped takes on the deep dive webinars by curating 3 days of conversations around the subject of non-alcoholic brewing. Day 1 focused on recipe formulation, Day 2 focused on fermentation, and Day 3 focused on finish, processing, packaging, etc., pasteurization, and whatnot. The webinar format offers a bit of a different take than this podcast. It's live, it's interactive. We work your questions and comments into the conversation. It's always panel driven, but because we love to connect the dots between these channels, I'm sharing some of the conversations from the first of the 3 days here on the podcast as well. Joining me for this conversation were Shawn Cooper of Halfway Crooks, Chris Lohring of Notch, and Craig Thomas of Abstrax, also a master cicerone. And we discuss hops, water, and malt in the context of brewing NA beer. If this sparks your interest, head to beerandbrewing.com, watch the full and unabridged version of this same conversation, and while you're there, check out the other 2 in the series on NA fermentation and NA finish, featuring great folks like Peter Bertram of Garage Project, Jordan Childs of Mash Gang, Chris O'Connor of Prost, and more. Speaking of connecting the dots, another thing, I'm excited to share something we've been working on for a couple of months now. It's this very podcast, but live on stage Monday night, April 20th, at the iconic music venue Union Transfer in Philadelphia. We are getting the IPA gang together live for one night only. That's Vinny Chilurzo of Russian River, Evan Price of Green Cheek, Kelsey McNair of North Park, along with some surprise guests that'll join us for segments along the way. We'll have Russian River beer on draft, an opportunity for live Q&A from you in the audience, and a whole lot more. It's going to be quite the party. If you aren't heading to the Craft Brewers Conference in Philly, don't worry. We're going to record it and put it out on the podcast feed so you won't miss the insights. But if you're going to be in Philly that Monday night, April 20th, block out your calendar after the welcome reception. Come be a part of the podcast live. We'll have tickets available starting next week. I'll share more about that once ticketing is active, but save the date. It is going to be a live one. All right, let's jump into this week's excerpt from the NA formulation deep dive. But first, a quick word for the brewers out there staring down a broken chiller. You know the pain. Warm fermenters, stressed yeast, and the sinking feeling when the repair quote lands in your inbox. With refrigerant regulations changing and the cost of obsolete refrigerants skyrocketing, sometimes the fix costs more than the unit is worth. GD Chillers is there to help, whether you're a small brew pub or a large, full-scale production brewery. Don't throw good money at bad equipment. Invest in a solution that grows with your brewery and keeps your tanks cold when it counts. Big thanks to G&D Chillers for supporting this podcast since 2019. Reach out to them at gdchillers.com/podcast to learn how they can support your next 8 years of growth. And Berkeley Yeast just launched Dry Tropics London, their best-selling liquid yeast strain. now with all the ease of use benefits of dry yeast. Dry Tropics London delivers the soft, pillowy mouthfeel and juicy character you'd expect from a top-tier London ale strain, but with a serious upgrade, a burst of thiols that unleash vibrant, layered notes of grapefruit and passion fruit. A lot of brewers love the clean passion fruit you get from Tropics, but they don't want every IPA to be a tropical fruit bomb. At the dry yeast price point, you can pitch and ditch without breaking the bank, or you can co-pitch with your house strain to adjust the intensity of the notes. And with nationwide free shipping, there's never been a better time to try Dry Tropics. Order now at berkeleyyeast.com and experience the ease and impact of Dry Tropics London yeast. Also, this episode is sponsored by PackTech, delivering craft beer multi-packing you can trust. PackTech's handles are made from 100% recycled plastic and are fully recyclable, helping breweries close the loop and advance the circular economy. With a minimalist design, durable functionality you can rely on, and custom color matching, PackTech helps brands stand out while staying sustainable. Trusted by craft brewers nationwide, they offer a smarter, sustainable way to carry your beer. To learn more, visit packtech-opi.com. That's PAKTECH-OPI.com. Now, let's jump into this excerpt from our NA Deep Dive, day 1 of the NA Deep Dive series focused on formulation.
Today's focus is on malt, hops, and water, how we build flavor, how we build texture, how we build body, how we build foam, and how we do all of that with a slightly different set of tools in NA beer. Let's kick it off with some quick introductions before we start. Chris, why don't you give us the 1-minute background on yourself and Notch?
It'd be 10 seconds. Chris Lohring, founder, owner, brewer at Notch Brewing in Salem, Massachusetts. We also have a secondary taproom brewery, beer garden in Boston, in the Brighton neighborhood. Started in 2010. Started dipping our toe into the NA area just before COVID hit. We were doing trials, and then COVID hit, and that kind of put us back. But something we wanted to do for a long time, and we now have 3 NAs in the market in 12-ounce cans.
Some of my favorite beer in the world, that is Wickle beer, one of my personal bests of last year on my personal critics list. Exciting to have you come at this from a perspective of someone who makes incredible sessionable beers in a broad sense, and then has also kind of moved into this kind of NA space. Shawn, why don't you give a little background on you and Halfway Crooks?
Hi, I'm Shawn, one of the co-founders of Halfway Crooks, along with my partner, Jorn van Hitterocker. We kind of focus on European lagers, Belgian beers, pretty much everything in space. But we kind of started to cut our teeth in NA a couple years ago, and we have now like about 2 brands, 12-ounce cans in the market. One's a IPA and one's a Pils.
Also, some of my favorite lager beer in the southern United States, maybe even the United States also. I think, and a place I always stop by when I'm in Atlanta, absolutely love it. And the craziest bathrooms that I've ever seen in any brewery, anywhere you have to go just to experience it. Craig, why don't you give us some background? You are a master cicerone, one of a very small number in the world. And so tell us about yourself.
Yeah, master cicerone. I started my beer journey a little over 15 years ago while I was living in Edinburgh. I started brewing out there, and then I went to brewing school at Harriet Watt. And after that, worked in some sensory consultancy, and then moved back here to the U.S. and worked at Firestone Walker for quite a few years, both on the floor and then in the quality lab run in the sensory program before I joined Abstrax Hops to, push to see what solutions we could bring to the industry. So it's been quite a ride.
Absolutely. Well, we'll pull on some of your brewing experience there too. I want to start off with a general broad question before we get into some of the more formulative details. And so maybe you can start off with this one, Chris. When we think about developing NA beer as a part of an overall craft brewery product strategy, there's a couple different routes you can go, right? You can create new brands where there's not an expectation for what that flavor is and try to lean directly into what is possible for you to make well in this NA space. Or you can also do what a brand like Deschutes may do and create an NA version of an existing brand where there is very clearly a flavor goal, to achieve, as you started thinking about how you're going to work NA into this. And again, you have beer across multiple styles from lager into ale styles. As you started thinking about how NA was going to fit into your broader craft product strategy, tell me about your thinking around how you were going to pursue, what kind of brand strategy you were going to pursue.
Well, for us, Notch in particular, for our first 10 years, we brewed only beers below 4.5% alcohol. We've expanded quite a bit from that because we got kind of well known for lager. So we just, felt it was a natural extension just to brew all strengths of lager, and that really benefited us quite a bit. So we did have this built-in awareness around that we brew lower alcohol beers, and it made really a lot of sense for us to go into NA. Some of the things we always talked about, having 3 beers instead of 2 was always like, a great option to have, or just having one and not feeling like you needed to take a nap. So NA, we just felt it was a natural, Notch as an extension. And then we have beers we use as inspiration, but we never thought we could do 1-to-1. Like if we didn't have any flagship, we felt we wanted to do the same exact thing in an NA. Partly was because I just felt like we weren't going to be able to achieve the same flavor profile based on all the obstacles we had ahead of us. So I didn't want to give the customer expectation that this was going to be. I think that's a really good path if you have really good brand equity and a certain style, and you can nail that. Great, Guinness did it really well. I'm not sure what else they would have done, right? But for us, we have a Pilsner that was loosely our Czech Pils, 10 Plato Czech lager. But we called it craft Pils because we didn't want to set an expectation. And we also thought that the universe was going to be a little different for who bought that beer. It's kind of geeky to come out with a beer, a 10 Plato Czech lager. Like, that's not an easy thing to talk about. And there's a lot of education behind that, where people think Czech Pilsner is a monolithic thing, and they don't know there's different alcohol strengths in Plato. What's Plato? That kind of stuff. So we took a different approach, but we'd had beers that were inspirations that we wanted to make NA. When we first started the whole project, in 2019, we were working with a person from MIT who kind of had this offshoot of a membrane filtration project that he was working on. Really not to de-alcoholize beer, but to concentrate beer for shipping. Something I wasn't really interested in, but that was a perceived market. So we worked with him in his lab to start doing beers. And so we just started doing Kolsch. We're like, I don't know, Kolsch has a nice residual sweetness in the beer. The body's really nice. We thought we could, kind of replicate that in an NA. And it really wasn't 1-to-1. So I think that was a learning experience for us. Saying, all right, it's good. We really like it, but we can call it a Kolsch, but we're not really going to say it's an NA version of our flagship Kolsch. So yeah, I think there was just some hesitation, and not really knowing how good we were going to be at it, until we iterated on it for a number of years. So yeah, no, so we haven't really done that. It's just not, you're not going to see one of our flagship beers be called an NA beer. Yeah.
You used craft in front of the word Pils just as a nod to the kind of consumer expectations, making sure that people didn't just get this beer and want it to be a completely minimalist kind of NA mass-produced Pilsner.
Yeah, it's not a Heineken 0.0, right? It's something that has flavor in it and has a hop character and a bitterness and a malt character. And our NAs go places our alcoholic beer just doesn't go, in terms of geography or channels. It just, one of the things about selling NA is all of a sudden you're not restricted from all the alcohol, BS that we got to deal with, and wholesaler arrangements, state line shipping, and all this other kind of stuff. It's a free world out there. And so our NA goes to spots people have no idea who Notch is from our alcohol, I don't even know how to refer to beers with alcohol now. It's like, you go to brew an NA beer, well, how do we talk about our beer? Right. So our beers with alcohol, they don't have the reach that, our NA beer has. So the craft Pils was a way for a customer who had no idea who we were to understand what they might be, getting into.
Yeah, we can't really call them alcoholic beers. That phrase just doesn't work.
They got suggestions.
Yeah. If you've got suggestions, throw them in the comments by all means. I came across your NA beers through ads on Untapped, just checking things in, and you're using that even as a kind of a marketing strategy because obviously you've got beer drinkers who may be interested in craft and you can kind of target. And just thought it was kind of an interesting way to think about growing a brand outside of your home market and thinking about all of those places that you could do it. Super cool. Shawn, as you guys were thinking about how to develop a Halfway Crooks NA brand, talk about your thought process on that and how you decided to pursue it.
Yeah. So, in Atlanta, we're really big cyclists. We're into the cycling scene here, quite heavily. We have a beer garden that a lot of cyclists meet up at, and we try to cultivate that relationship with them and that community. So we kind of wanted to have a nod to that. So we came up with a completely different kind of NA brand called Brevet. And that's kind of it's basically like a cycling race that, it's like a long distance race that riders need to compete in a set route with a time limit, which we kind of thought would be cool for an NA brand because it's kind of like going the distance. You're able to drink a lot of those, hopefully, and not, not feel the effects of alcohol. And, we kind of got well known for our lagers, kind of like Notch, and kind of want to lean more into that space. So we kind of, came out with a Pils as our first kind of brand of Brevet. So it's just called Brevet Pils. We kept Halfway Crooks on there because we wanted people to know, obviously, that that's coming from us, but we really wanted to differentiate that brand from our other beers. So yeah, we just didn't, we didn't have a lot of, in our market, we didn't see a lot of NA kind of beers that kind of trended towards the experience you get with the pale lager. So we decided let's shoot for that first. And it was actually proved to be quite difficult for us at first. Our first kind of trials weren't that great, and it took us about a year to really dial in kind of the profile we were looking for.
We'll be back with more from the deep dive in a minute, but first, the multi-layered wonders of indie hop strata are now easier than ever for brewers to tap into. Introducing Strata Cryo in collaboration with Yakima Chief Hops. Whether brewing up a single hop Strata IPA to wow customers with the depth of flavor this variety delivers, or modernizing your flagship IPA to continue setting the highest standards, Strata T90, Strata CGX, Strata Hyperboost, and now Strata Cryo provide the tools for brewers to create their unique masterpiece. Indie Hop Strata, life is short, let's make it flavorful. And if you're like many podcast listeners, you've got a lot of beers at home and your regular fridge is at capacity, enter the Midea 50/50 Flex, the industry's first dual compartment 3-way convertible freezer. Here's what all that means for you. Options. The 50/50 has the power to be all freezer, all fridge, or a little bit of both, but you'll probably want to use those 20 cubic feet as a massive garage-ready beer fridge. You can also change which side the door is on or how you want the shelves to be arranged. The 50/50 totally flexes to fit your life. Plus, it's designed to maintain a stable temperature even in non-climate controlled conditions, so you can crack a cold one even on the warmest days in the man cave. Take your garage to the next level. Check out midea.com/US to get more information about this game changer today. Also, the Beyond Beer space is booming, and Old Orchard is here for it, supplying breweries with fruit ingredients for all your beverage needs. Low-no alcohol, hard lemonades, seltzer, cider, and more. Old Orchard has supplied hundreds of industrial customers across 49 states, including nationally and internationally loved brands, so you'll be in good company. More information and free samples are waiting at oldorchard.com/brewer. That's oldorchard.com/brewer.
I assume one of the first big things you had to answer was what kind of process you're going to go through, because how you go about creating beer without alcohol. I mean, there's three main processes. You can use Saxorvisier and then arrest the fermentation before it's complete. You can use maltotriose negative yeast, which isn't going to produce that alcohol, or you can brew a full strength alcohol beer and then remove the alcohol through membrane filtration and then, pull it back together. So and each one of those kinds of processes will impact how you then design a recipe out. At a high level, Chris, how did you start thinking about what process avenue you're going to, and did you try multiples of these avenues? You mentioned working with a MIT scientist at first there.
Yeah, so I guess we started it with the thought that there's no way we could do it ourselves, because at the time, 2018, equipment was really expensive. I mean, pasteurization seemed to be the only way forward, and we didn't have a tunnel pasteurizer. So, we were kind of restricted by what we didn't know. And so for us, financial decision was made that we would use someone else's equipment, which included a tunnel pasteurizer. So at first we were doing these trials that were, membrane filtration. And that's kind of what we stayed on that path. We do arrested fermentation on a couple, but for our lagers, we've been doing membrane filtration. And I've been really happy with that. The person we were working with at MIT, his business was sold right after COVID. I think some other circumstances came up for that company. So we had to move. And so we went to SBT, Sustainable Beverage Technology, to Colorado, and started working with them because they had a very similar process. And I really liked the results of the membrane filtration. And again, there was a lot I didn't know about the different options, especially arrested fermentation. So we just chose that path. And we've been doing that for our pills. We also have an amber lager or Vienna style, and then a Czech black lager coming out as well sometime later this year. But we also do we do a straight up hazy IPA, which is an arrested fermentation, which I kind of like the results of that better than the membrane filtration. And for again, this was just kind of through happenstance as you're going through this process, just trying to figure out what was available to us in terms of technology, who we could partner with to get this done. And so we could also have control and achieve the results we want with the recipes we had to try to make sure they were unique and not just an off-the-shelf solution, because I think that's happening a bit right now, where a brewer can go out and just select something that's kind of a la carte and throw their name on it. And that's definitely not our path. So, the technology was kind of established early for us in terms of where we were going to go, and that kind of made the decisions we wouldn't do it in house because we didn't have a spare $500,000 lying around for a concept we weren't sure it was going to work. So that's how we landed on that. If we had started later, we might have, I think arrested fermentation, which Shawn can speak to, would have been a path that might have been something we could iterate on and have control of in our own facility, but we were already too far down the path of what we were doing to consider that.
No, and that's common. We've got, over the course of these 3 days, we have brewers that are working in all of those modes, brewers that are working with co-packers. But obviously, the thing that makes it craft is your involvement in the product itself. And that's why we're having this conversation. In fact, both of you all have worked in both of those ways. But I think it's interesting what you say here, Chris, that it's not like you chose a method. You are choosing the right method for different beer styles based on what is going to make that beer style the best. And sometimes it's sometimes it's filtration, sometimes, it's fermentation driven. And there are actually other brewers we'll talk to tomorrow that are doing the same kind of thing. And we'll talk about that in the scope of fermentation. But I just think that that's interesting to note. Shawn, as you all made some decisions, how did you then choose to go down that road? You started also making it in-house, and so that may have impacted some of the process decisions.
Yeah, we first made it in-house, and we were using like a maltose negative strain. The first time we used this specific strain, it requires like circulation and a constant contact on the yeast, and that just really didn't yield very good results for us. So we kind of switched over to more of a dry yeast product that has worked out very well for us. And what we've done is we kind of arrest the fermentation with temperature, and then we use a kind of like a preservative to maintain the microbial stability of the beer. With a chitosan product called Kyber. So that's the kind of route we took. And by doing that, you have to send the cans out to a lab and get a count back and make sure that everything's stable, and especially kind of testing for other bacteria, mold, you name it, in the beer to make sure it's stable, because it's definitely like kind of more of like a food product. at that stage, and you want to make sure that it's safe for people to consume. So like in-house, that's kind of why we kind of chose to do that. And then we started using a contract partner in which we started to filter the beer even more to make sure we remove as much as we could before applying that preservative to the beer, which has proved to make the beer is way better that way, we think, too. So it's turning out much more, I would guess, consistent and stable than it was if we made it at our facility, which has a lot of, we just don't have all the equipment that we need to use. So there's a lot of ways to not be safe at our facility. So.
Sure. So to recap, because we just had a question about it, Chris the Notch is using membrane filtration and tunnel pasteurization and arrested fermentation only on the hazy IPA, Chris?
Right.
And Shawn is using arrested fermentation, and then you say using temperature, so I assume you are crashing it very cold, very fast to knock all of that yeast out, and then running it through additional filtration to remove all of that yeast, and then using chemical stabilization to prevent that yeast from growing again. So you have three different methods now across the two breweries with different kinds of approaches there, which again makes this kind of interesting. But let's talk about it from now from a kind of a recipe formulation point. One of the when we were talking about designing these beers, one of the biggest critiques that brewers run into is this unfermented wort and grainy kind of wort character. I'm sure across lager styles, lighter beers, you guys can see that and have had to adjust and try to work around that. I imagine in some of the more like bigger flavored hop driven things like hazy IPA, that might not be quite as big of an issue. But Chris, maybe you can speak to that in your developmental process. What were some of the problems that you ran into in terms of building a malt base across a couple of these different styles? And were there some kinds of either malt choices or some specific ways that you set about, or even some of the fermentation kind of tweaks that have helped adjust for some of the kind of flavor challenges that you may have run into?
Yeah, I think we had an assumption that a lot of what we had learned through making, lower alcohol beers, between like 3.5% to 4.5% would help us in non-alcoholic beers. And to a large extent it has. We just had to adjust a bit. Maybe we had to do more of something. So I guess with the malt bill to start, some things that were good for us were, we basically had our grists weren't too much different, or our malt bill wasn't too much different when we, in the end with the NA, we might have upped maybe some dextrin malt, some wheat if the beer had any wheat in the grist. But it didn't have to do too much different there. Maybe some color adjustment, but that typically was happening downstream, not in the grist. So we were definitely doing some color adjustment, especially our dark lager. We did color adjustment downstream rather than using a roasted malt or a carafa malt, which we felt would have a negative impact, possibly some bitterness too, as much as we're trying to remove that. That beer shouldn't come from bitterness, even in the alcoholic version. Shouldn't come from the dark malt. So some dextrin malts, et cetera. Some things that are kind of obvious to anyone, in brewing. And then, mash temperatures kind of were something we thought was also important. And so, we definitely leaned heavy into, going to, 158 to 162 and resting there for a while. And these are for the membrane filtration beers, that we're talking about. So we're almost, coming out of like we're brewing a regular beer to a large extent. And so, long rests at alpha, 160, land on that and do that for a while. With the goal there is trying to have, a higher finishing gravity as much as possible, so that could create some body in the finished beer, much like you would a regular beer. And then I guess the one thing we did lean a little heavier on, well, bitterness was an important one because we knew that bitterness would be more present in the NA version of the beer, but we definitely wanted the beer to be bitter because like any brewer, when you're trying to do something, you go and sample all the competition to learn, see who did it right and who didn't, or, just from a sensory perspective, what you liked and didn't like. Not that it's right or wrong. And bitterness is one for us that we really wanted because it made the NA taste like a beer. We've had a lot of NAs that just tasted like juice, and we really wanted this not to have that character. So, the bitterness was something we really had to think about and where that bitterness was coming from. Was it going to be a Tetra hop at the end? And we have done that. So it's downstream to adjust. It's purely just bitterness. And then where you're getting your aromatics and flavors from, making sure that those you get the aromatic that you want, but without excessive, bitterness contribution. And then mineral or salts, for us was something we had to go. So hops we had to think about a little bit differently. And then water adjustment was something we really had to think about quite a bit too, because we actually went heavier in some regard in some of our water treatment than we would in a standard beer.
Chris, you're jumping ahead. We're definitely going to talk about water. That's a
brain down.
Okay. You're breaking my normal, comfortable linearity to this whole process. No, we'll.
I'm just teasing it out. We're going to get there.
Just wait. We are going to get there. We're definitely going to talk more about hops. We're definitely going to talk more about water.
We'll be back with more in a minute, but first, Brightly Software, a Siemens company, partners with organizations at every stage of their asset lifecycle journey. Brightly is a complete asset management and operations software that enhances organizational sustainability, compliance, and efficiency through data-driven decision-making. Streamline maintenance, simplify capital planning, and optimize resources with solutions uniquely designed to support long-term goals. Learn more at brightlysoftware.com. And tickets are on sale now for the annual Craft Beer and Brewing Brewers Retreat, August 23rd through 26th in the hop country of Yakima Valley, Washington. There is nothing like this fantasy homebrew camp experience as you brew in small groups led by some of the most inspiring brewers in the world. Folks like Vinny and Natalie of Russian River, Ben from Breakside, Henry and Adriana of Monkish, Kelsey from North Park, Whitney from Grand Fir, Shawn from Lawson's Finest, and a whole lot more. This year we'll be brewing under the vines at Bale Breaker, and it's sure to be an unforgettable experience. Tickets are on sale now, going fast at brewersretreat.com. Now, back to the deep dive on formulation.
Shawn, when you started thinking about malt and the way that your process interacts with that malt through arrested fermentation, how did you adjust for maybe some of the under fermented kind of malt character? Did you make different malt choices, or did you boost in different kinds of ways? How'd you solve for that?
With our pills, it's obviously, mostly pills malt. We use a malt called Spitz malt, which is kind of like dextrin or under modified malt. And then we use, we actually used, we adjusted for color in the mash instead of downstream. We were seeing like downstream. We tried to adjust downstream, but we were getting more of like a gray color, grayish hue to the beer that we didn't really like. So we kind of solved for that by just kind of adjusting in the mash, and it's worked out well for us. Like when
you say adjust in the mash, what do you mean?
Oh, we're adding like melanoidin malt or something like that, right? To give it a little more color, and very low amount, but a little bit goes a long way in these in our mash with this.
Just a little dash on top,
Yeah, and it's such a we're only, I think our beer starts at 5 Plato, so there's not a lot of it's not a heavy grain bill when it comes to our mash tun. So like the volume isn't huge. So we every little bit is pretty. It makes a pretty significant contribution. And we also kind of thought about hops and along the lines of what Chris was saying. We tend to like our pilsners a little more bitter compared to people other breweries in the market that we try. And also it's not wrong. It's just our preference. So we kind of found that adding that bitterness helped with the perception of body in the beer, or the perception of substance in the beer. Like it's not like you're not hopefully it's an NA beer, but it doesn't taste, like a typical NA beer. It's got some depth to it, and our hop bill for our pills is very layered throughout the boil too, to kind of help with to add the complexity of the product.
We're going to talk about hops in a minute, but I like Chris, are you mashing hot in order to create less, because you want to create more body, but you also don't want to do it through sweetness, right? Like the goal is not to have this be sugary. The goal is to have it have some of that weight, but usually that kind of unfermentable, dextrinous kind of malt character.
Yeah, we're resting around like 73C, just to make sure there's no simple sugars in there. So we try to make a malt taste for us, I guess, at 73C for us.
And then, are there any other additional malts that you've worked into even something like Pilsner in order to kind of create more perception of body in it?
The Pilsner is really just 3 malts. It's the Pils, the Dextrin malt, and the Melanoidin. And then our IPA, actually, we kind of took a line from Tim at Berkeley Yeast and kind of looked at what he was doing with his West Coast IPAs. And I think he's published quite a bit of recipes on that subject. And we kind of looked a little bit at what he was doing and tried that out, and it worked really well for us. We've made some tweaks, but that was a really good. Those are some really good malt bills, and ours is kind of like for our IPA, like we have, I would say we have 4 different malts. So we're using Pilsner, wheat, Spitz, and Melanoidin to give it a little more, to give it some color and a little more body.
Sure. Well, let's talk about hops now for real, Chris. And you mentioned bitterness as being a key thing, and I think this is probably going to become the overarching theme for this for today's session. That not shying away from flavor is probably the most successful way to make a craft NA beer. That we're never going to, from a craft perspective, compete with the lower cost, hyper minimalist, nothing NA beers from some of the biggest producers. And so rather than trying to compete in that space, embracing flavor becomes this kind of broader way. Sorry to steal your thunder here, Craig, because I know that you've got a great talking point around that. But Chris, so bitterness, but even creating an amped up bitterness was important for you. As you started thinking about this, even with no alcohol, you still got this relatively significant body. And then when you start thinking about bitterness, even with the NA space, how much bitterness was enough? And is there a way that you sculpted the quality of that bitterness so that it complemented each of the beer styles that you were developing in?
So the bitterness was something that we felt was really important, and we had to take this. We had to understand who our consumer was going to be, and then how do we want to present the beer to them. We wanted a consumer that wanted beer, not something that was just like an alt beverage or something like that. Just didn't really taste like beer. I mean, there's a lot of hazy NA IPAs in the market that taste like juice, right? And they're good, but to me they lack a component. You lose the alcohol, which is a sensory component that you lose, and then how do you substitute that? And one of the ways I think to remind people that it's a beer is to have bitterness. Some of the trends in beer, over the last 10 years has moved away from bitterness, but I think that's something we wanted to go back to because it is just kind of this hallmark of beer is like that bitter component. So, knowing that, we just wanted to approach it in a way that was still pleasant. It wasn't an aspirin-y bitterness. It wasn't an unpleasant bitterness. It was something that had flavor and aromatic as well. So, we did some downstream stuff, but that was really once we realized we didn't do enough. There was a couple times where we made juice and we're like, all right, we gotta adjust this. So we used some Tetra, downstream, and then we have leaned into really like late kettle edition, but again, it's not 1-to-1. For us, it wasn't. It came less about math and calculations and just about really we just got into like iterating on a batch and just understanding what X contributed and saying, all right, then we're going to go relative more or less. Right? It was very unscientific for a while. because we're really looking for sometimes sensory is tough to quantify in that way. It's not just about IBUs; it's about all the other components coming together. So, I think for us, we wanted a bitterness that was pleasant but also balanced, and probably a little more than we would have in a beer, where the alcohol really gives it a component that is missing in an NA. But I guess it's going to be a larger conversation. It's just not the hops; it's kind of everything we wanted to amplify a little bit to remind you it's a beer, and we thought the bitterness was an important component of that.
I think, Shawn, one of my biggest challenges, and maybe I'll also get your take on this too, Craig, one of my biggest challenges when drinking NA beer that I find from a hops perspective is that the hops can often come across almost tea-like rather than hops-like. It feels like steeped hop tea rather than beer per se. And I know, Shawn, you worked pretty hard at that to use hops in different ways throughout the process to kind of overcome, like, if you don't have some like expected hop character and depth, then it's it's not gonna taste like a beer.
Yeah, we kind of like dose the hops. We kind of start at the whirlpool and work our way backwards. We usually look at total oil content, so you need the hop analysis for that, and I need to have we use kind of a calculator there and use total oil. And we found that ours is like half of what we usually do in our beers with alcohol in them. And then once we kind of figured that out and we kind of layered it in
half
oil
50%. Huh.
Yeah, oil content. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not necessarily like matter, but that kind of sort of is correlated. But yeah, we kind of
due to the way the kind of interaction of the malt body and not lack of alcohol later, because I'd also assume that you've now got a no alcohol solution that may be slightly less extractive in general than beer itself, although apparently that it's not a huge effect that small amount of alcohol has.
Yeah, I mean, this is in the whirlpool, so we're not, I guess I didn't really think about it in the way of like alcohol extraction of the oil, like it was, we're separating that we're separating hopefully
you're right,
from
it's all happening
from the hops to so but basically we kind of started there and then kind of layered the hops mid boil, and then adjusted the bitterness at the early addition. And you kind of need to reach a limit and then work your way backwards, I think. And that's where the iterations come into play. You're going to have some misses, I think, or you're going to see, the way, the recipe of the hops kind of, affect, the final product. And so, we just kind of adjusted that to our tastes. But, it's something I did, we noticed, in particular is, the amount of total oil in our calculations was half than it usually was. So that was kind of an interesting finding, and kind of it makes sense.
This is a very American craft brewer approach. Let's see where the limit is. Let's go right to the edge of it and let's step over it, and then we can bring it back to figure out where we need to be. Is there something to the kinds of hops, or are you simply selecting hops that fit the specific style? Are you deliberately using lower oil hops, or even higher oil hops, but just at a lower total oil concentration in order, are you manipulating it in some way there to adjust how much green matter comes into contact with the beer?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we're using hops that are the newer varieties coming out of Germany that have like a higher oil content. So they're all above like 1.2, 1.3. And we kind of figured let's use that to, in case there's some kind of body component to oil in the content in the beer, but also that does decrease the vegetal matter if the oil content of that hop is higher and you're trying to reach a certain threshold of total oil in the whirlpool.
So that's an answer to Francisco's question there. It is not about using lower oil hops. It's actually using higher oil hops with less of them and managing the lower total oil content between them in order to kind of keep that vegetative load lower. Craig, from your standpoint, working with other customers that are making NA beers. What are some of the hop strategies, popular hop strategies that you see folks using, and how does how does that work? From what you've seen.
Yeah, I mean, everybody has their own method. If there's one thing I've learned about in the brewing industry is there are many right ways to make a beer or a non-alc beer, but or there's no right way, but many wrong ways to do it. So everybody you speak to is going to come up with different theories. But I think the overarching theme, especially, and actually not just with hops, but just understanding the basic mechanics behind some of these flavor developments that we've previously taken for granted within the brewing process. When you look at hops for generations, we have two types of hops, and one of them had one side they've been bred to be used hot side, and in the flavors that those produce, those are very reliant on biotransformative elements of the yeast. And then more recently, we have cold side hops that are almost exclusively reliant on the extractive component of dry hopping and alcohol in there. And in both those scenarios, when we're talking about non-alcoholic beer production, they're either non-existent, those mechanisms, or they're greatly diminished. So we have to kind of rethink how we approach, using these hops, these ingredients that have been bred to be used in a certain way for hundreds of years, and figure out the key components that are relevant to flavor structures or process or anything like Shawn said. And so I think that when I speak to brewers, it is very pulled apart in the same way actually that we are as a company, is like we are pulling apart the hop in order to figure out which point fits in where, and learning how to put it into process at whatever point to get the maximum, effects in that component. So I think that most of the brewers that I speak with do use some amount of vegetal hop matter for the reasons that you typically use them in regular beer brewing. But they're using them at different points in the process or with different kind of like approaches to it, like Shawn said, to do mainly less with aroma and more with tactile and bitterness components, and even some colloidal stability. And then you have to figure out the secondary component of the hop charge, which is the aromatics, and how you're going to push that forward, either with hop ingredients or with other ingredients. And I think that nowadays we are in a space where the stigma has been removed, and there are so many new ways of pushing flavor anymore, coming from yeast, coming from hops, coming from natural flavors. We are really unrestrained as brewers anymore. And I think that it's important to kind of like expand the scope of ingredients that we're working with in order to deliver the flavor profiles that we want and expect, despite the fact that all of the tools in our toolbox, or many of them, have been pulled out. They aren't existent there with non-alcoholic beer. So we have to find a new set of tools to replace them.
100%. To answer some of the questions that are coming up there, I should say that for the beer that Halfway Crooks makes at their own brewery, they are not pasteurizing. They are using Kyber to stabilize that. And Chris has mentioned at Notch that they are producing at a facility that does have a tunnel pasteurizer. And so those are two different methods there, just to clear that up for folks that are in the comments there. But and then, as we were just talking about, with Halfway Crooks, especially on the Pils side, layering in multiple hot side hop additions from early on into Whirlpool, using high alpha German hops, modern varieties. Let's talk about IPA or this kind of hop forward thing. Now, if you're making NA in the IPA space, people have some expectation around that. Aroma is a big piece of it. Dry hopping is a big piece of it. Chris, how do you guys, or what kind of ways are you using, both traditional hops in, pellets or whole cones, as well as advanced hop products, in some sort of harmonious way to build an idea of hops? How have you tried to solve for that problem?
And you just said all of it. Really, we've tried all of that. So one of it, we also do a hop water, which I know isn't the focus here, but with the hop water, we use a lot of hot products to come at a certain character, because with the hop water, it's just bitterness is really bad, and a tea-like character can be really present. that's unpleasant as well. So we got a bunch of samples from Haas and a couple other vendors to kind of figure that all out. And we've been able to take some of the trials that we've done with the hop water and then introduce that into the NA, and that's been pretty successful. Because you really, with the hop water, it's right there. You know exactly what's happening, and that's been successful for us. And back to Shawn's point, with the oil, it's funny because as he was saying that, there was a reason. We have a Czech Pilsner, cold Plato Czech Pilsner at Notch that we do everything really, pretty traditional in terms of decoction and open fermentation and all those other laundry lists of buzzwords. But we don't use Saaz. We use Sterling primarily because Saaz alpha acids are below 3, and it's just, it's really wasteful from a number of standpoints. We started using Sterling, which is, kind of a Saaz derivative of that grown in the United States with high hop oil, fairly high alpha acid, and it just because we should use a lot less of it and achieve the same goals, and it was really successful for us. And that's what we ended up using in our NA IPA as well for the same reason. So we kind of got at that, through just regular beer production. So it was interesting to hear him say that. So and also we in our NA IPA we've exactly one hazy that we have at the brewery for tap room customers who really want that. And just over the course of 10 years, just developed that to where we really like it, where there is some bitterness that was again by design because we wanted to differentiate ourselves. Being in the middle of New England, it's hard to differentiate yourself in the hazy IPA world or hazy pale ale world. And so we wanted to make one that actually had bitterness to it because we did it because we're as brewers, like, this is the thing we want to drink, and since it's only going to be one, let's make it something that is reflective of us. So there was a good bitterness component in that as well. So we kind of just mimic that in terms of, the kettle. There's no kettle additions. There's only Whirlpool hops into the Whirlpool, and then some dry hopping, and that was it. And we kind of just mimic that exact same process. And now it's a 4% beer, 4.5% beer. So it's already, it's a little more delicate. It doesn't have that sugar. It doesn't have that, sweetness that you would associate with a New England IPA. So that was kind of things we learned in that process. We just transferred over to the NA IPA because we were going to deal with the same challenges. So late kettle addition, some dry hopping, and then some other hop products that can just add aromatics without any bitterness.
Are there some specific hops that you guys have found work that either kind of capture in a broader idea, despite the kind of especially in this kind of hazy, juicy realm, like you now need things that are going to jump out, even though you're using them in smaller concentrations, or in in this sense, like half of your normal total oil content for hops. So there's has that impacted varieties that you use and that you select and work into your blends?
Yes and no. I mean, there was an expected one. We use Citra, which isn't very exciting to hear that, but it's tried and true for a reason.
At least you're honest.
Yeah. But we also landed on there's a Czech hop called Kazbek, Kazbek. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it correctly. Like, Czech isn't good. That was a wonderful hop in our NA. It really, really it really just punched the aroma where we needed it. So that was a pleasant surprise. And we've been fooling around, basically new varietals of Czech hops. And this one in particular really, really, just kind of hit the notes that we wanted. Really pleasant, differentiated without having, with like an acceptable range of aromatics, we think for a general consumer, who's looking for like a hazy IPA character. It wasn't too out of line. They wouldn't be taken aback by it.
Sure. Shawn, as you were thinking about how to build a blend of aroma that pops out, because again, in this kind of thing, like people who are opening up an IPA, like if it doesn't have that aroma that pops out at you, then, it's just not going to, like, that's a great way, even if there's less bitterness and less hops in the flavor itself in this NA space, that strength of aroma helps set people up for thinking that it's there and playing some of that kind of psychological game. How did you build in your IPA, build a hop blend that was going to work in that kind of, both through the hop variety, but also some of the hop products?
Yeah, we kind of use different hop products, pellets, along with, we use abstract products as well. In the like hot side, we primarily use pellets. And the cold side, we use a combination of like abstracts, like Simcoe. We use Mosaic pellets. We use abstract Mosaic, and then we also use their Sky Farm stuff too as well. Like I kind of wanted to get the like our selected Citra. I really wanted to get the best qualities of those, and I wanted to recreate that for the consumer and get some consistency there. So yeah, the Abstrax products have really helped kind of dial that in, like what we're actually looking for in Citra and Mosaic and Simcoe.
Wait, so you're saying you use some of the hop derived and natural derived fruit flavors in order to kind of high point some of the fruit notes that you would potentially get from hops in the cold side?
Correct, and a little goes a long way, I found. So it's really helped kind of, and we've also blended those and had kind of benchtop trials on like which way to go with those. And we've only made 2 batches of our NAIPA, but we've been very happy with the aroma of those batches. And definitely, when you open the can, you smell what I'm hoping people smell when they have our actual alcoholic products made with the Citra that we selected.
Hope you've enjoyed this excerpt from last week's deep dive, day 1 on formulation and NA beer, featuring Craig Thomas of Abstrax, Chris Lohring of Notch, and Shawn Cooper of Halfway Crooks. Once again, if you'd like to hear and watch the entire unabridged version from start to finish, go to beerandbrewing.com and find it there. And then while you're there, check out the other 2 days of webinars as well. They are all right there under the course, which you can find in the right-hand column at the very top of that course list there. Good stuff. We're going to keep doing these every quarter in this kind of expanded format, and then as well as monthly with our normal one-day webinar thing. So whether you love to listen to the podcast, whether you like to watch and interact in the webinar format, whether you want to see something produced on site with our video classes, or you want to read something, or you want a recipe in print that you load into your own brewing software, or you want to come experience it live, we have the most inspiring perspectives from the world's best brewers that we bring to you through all of those channels, because everyone loves to learn in different ways, and we are here for all of you. Don't throw good money at bad equipment. Invest in a solution from G&D Chillers that grows with your brewery and keeps your tanks cold when it counts. Berkeley Yeast's Dry Tropics London offers their best-selling liquid yeast strain with the ease of use of dry yeast. PacTex handles are made from 100% recycled plastic and are fully recyclable. The multi-layered wonders of Indie Hop Strata are now easier than ever for brewers to tap into with Strata Cryo. The Midea 50/50 Flex can convert to all fridge, all freezer, or half and half with just the touch of a button. Keep your customers engaged with new flavors from Old Orchard. Brightly software enhances your data-driven decision-making. And get your tickets now to the Craft Beer and Brewing Brewers Retreat. Once again, go to beerandbrewing.com to watch the full webinar and the other 2 in that series. And stay tuned for more info next week about how to get your tickets to the Craft Beer and Brewing podcast live Monday night, April 20th, after the welcome reception. Philly CBC will be at Union Transfer for this. It's going to be pretty epic. You do not want to miss it. It will be the place to be. I'm going to go back and crawl under a blanket and try to finish my recovery here and get over this stupid cold. Stay healthy, everybody. Watch out. Those kids will bring everything home with them, and there is just no escaping it, as anyone who's a parent understands. Stay healthy, and anyway, drink one from me. Be back next week. Cheers.
This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.